Let me guess. Someone stole your sweet roll.
What's up, everybody? So one of the new commanders from the 2017 Precon set is none other than the Dragon. That's right, the Dragon. This is the big old daddy of dragons, and it's bringing some thunder and fury. In this video, we're going to take a look at a deck that we've been brewing to utilize this mighty dragon, and maybe take a few of these new cards from this deck for a test drive. So, dragon decks are rather tricky to build when you have all 5 colors at your disposal. You have so many options to choose from, but one of the things that I really like about the Dragon as the commander is that you can use his ability to cheat other cards into play. So we're going to play off that and use a few cards to help us get out our dragons. We'll get into those later. We're going to start instead with the best dragons that we want to run. Some of these are actually in the Precon deck, so if you pick it up, you'll already be on your way. We run a number of the Tarkir dragons. A Tarka World Render gives any attacking dragon double strike. Given that many of these are huge creatures to begin with, and some even have trample like a Tarka here, that will spell big damage from your attack. Deathbringer Regent is also a board wipe on a stick, a very big stick, and more of a stick with wings. Having 5 creatures in play isn't terribly difficult to reach in Commander, especially if you have 3 other players trying to assemble their forces. Dragonlord Dramoka is excellent protection, letting you proceed through your turns unhindered by your opponents trying to do things. Colligan is remarkably powerful, especially in conjunction with the Tarka's double strike granting ability. Colligan's ability triggers off of each dragon attacking, giving your creatures +5/+0 should you be swinging in with 5 dragons. You can also dash it in, which can be good if you want to use it as an Alpha Strike card. Sillim Guard is another dragon that I very sorely underestimated in my initial reaction to it. When you see text like Sillim Guard that says whenever a dragon attacks, that means the more dragons you attack with, the more that ability scales. Get it? Dragon scales? But this can mean that in swinging in an opponent, you might easily wipe out their board of any potential blockers. It also has hexproof, making it really difficult to remove. Our next brood of dragons brings great value and power to the table. Balefire Dragon can wipe your opponent's boards clean should it connect, making it crucial to be blocked. Dragon Broodmother spawns a token during each upkeep. That can be very dangerous, as not only does this trigger at each player's upkeep, but these tokens have Devour too. So whenever a token hits the battlefield, you could sacrifice any number of other creatures you control to put 2 +1/+1 counters on that token for each sacrificed creature. That's dangerous and a very potent spawn of creatures. Speaking of token spawn, my personal favorite dragon, the Udvara Hellkite, spawns a 6/6 dragon every time a dragon attacks. So should you be swinging in with 4 dragons, you get 4 6/6 dragon tokens. Scalelord Reckoner is a newcomer that blows up a non-land permanent opponent controls every time a dragon gets targeted. So, maybe don't point your swords of plowshares at me, okay? Kakusho the Evening Star is brutal, and also embodies the secondary strategy of our Graveyard Recursion, which we're going to discuss later. If you play with 3 other players, Kakusho is going to drain 5 life from each player when it dies and give you a total of 15 life. So, as you're taking hits in the beginning while you're building up your brood, this is going to be a nice band-aid to completely remove any of that damage. Steel Hellkite is pure value, blowing up problem creatures that try to harm our dragons, and of course Scion of the Dragon shows up to help feed our graveyard for our graveyard shenanigans. Now, about the recursion abilities, dragons tend to die every so often, and that's just not going to do. So we run a number of cards that will first get the dragons into the graveyard, and then we have another that returns the dragons to the battlefield. Bladewing the Risen returns a dragon to your battlefield, and you can dump any excess red and black mana into it to pump up your board some more. Sneak Attack is by far one of the best options here, letting you cheat your dragons into play fast, getting them in for some damage, and then you can recur them later when they go to the graveyard. Beacon of Unrest is a repeatable animation spell, letting us bring back any dead dragon, and then it shuffles away to be used later. Speaking of reanimation, we do run Reanimate. Yeah, we will be taking quite a bit of damage since most of these dragons cost a lot, but getting out a dragon for 1 black mana isn't half bad. Unburial Rites is a 2-time use animation spell, and perhaps the best one in the deck, Living Death. Oh look, all those dragons you sent to the grave are back, and your field is gone. Alright, now I know what you're thinking. We have a lot of high-costed creatures. This is the bane of dragon decks in general. Dragon's Bane! But in order to level the table a little bit, we do run a number of cards to help keep our opponent at bay. We have a number of removal spells that come in handy, like Anguished Unmaking, Mortify, Putrefy, Swords to Plowshares, and of course Path to Exile, and the ever-loved Cyclonic Rift. My personal board Wrath effect is Crux of Faith, since it avoids anything that isn't a dragon, although you're more than welcome to add more Wrath of God effects if you so choose. We have a few draw spells in this deck, which help us get more hand advantage to give us more options later when the Dragon's trigger hits. Kindred Discovery is a new card that gives us a card draw on an enter the battlefield of our creature type, as well as on the attack of that creature type, which will be dragons. Sylvan Library is a staple in any green deck, giving us 2 cards extra per turn. The life loss is negligible once you look at some of the gain we'll be getting later on. Teamer Ascendancy, which also gives our creatures haste, and since most of the dragons have 4 power or more, any dragon that hits the field will get a card draw off of. Alright, so momentary rant here. One of the things I don't like about the Dragon's Precon deck is the mana base. The biggest pet peeve of mine in mana base building are the words enter the battlefield tapped. Nearly every non-basic land in this entire deck enters the battlefield tapped, making it one of the slowest mana bases in any Precon deck. And being that it's a 5-color deck, dragons, they want to get ramping and fixing mana as fast as possible, so having all these lands that enter the battlefield tapped, no fetch lands or anything, it's crippling to the strategy. So we're going to completely redo the mana base of this deck to be something slightly better. Firstly, I'm personally running all 10 shock lands. These are the optimal dual lands for this deck, thanks in part to their basic land types making them fetchable. We also run all 5 of the Khans fetches, which is a nod to the flavor of dragons, as well as my budget not having the Zendikar fetches on the menu. Any one of these fetches can go for any color we need due to the shock lands. And if your budget can't make do with these lands, you can always substitute in things like the Signet lands, the Pain lands, and just the Guild Gates and such. We do run a number of cards that give us access to all colors of mana. AetherHub, Ancient Ziggurat, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Haven of the Spirit Dragon, Pillar of the Peruns, and the newcomer Path of Ancestry. Cavern of Souls, while extremely expensive for a land, finds so much use here as being a protector of our dragon spells and as just a general omnicolor land. And while not actual lands, Prismatic Omen and Chromatic Lantern are must-haves to make sure all of our lands are tappable for any color of mana. Aside from that, we do only run 2 basic forests, 4 mountains, a single plains, and then 3 swamps. And due to our very low presence of blue mana and the mana costs of those blue spells being covered by our dual lands, I don't choose to run any basic islands. So the strategy for this build is very straightforward and direct. You drop the dragons, you swing in and make more dragons. Should they die, which they will die, we have plenty of methods to bring them back from the grave, making this deck very potent to ensure our dragons stay out. And that's going to wrap up our coverage of the Dragon Tribe for now. How are you going to be building your dragon deck? Do you have any suggestions for cards we didn't talk about? If you're interested in seeing the full deck list, there's going to be a link to the tapped out page for this deck in the description of this video. Don't forget to like this video if you want to see more coverage of the new Commander decks. Share this with your Commander playgroup, and if you want to help support the channel, check out our Patreon. We have some sweet stuff coming up. Let's help make the Planeswalker Project become one of the best Commander channels on YouTube, and with that, I'll see you all at the beginning of the next upkeep.